Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another webinar. I'm Gilbert with the CrossLink training team, and I'm happy to provide you some information today on how to use the CrossLink 1040 software to prepare a return. Today, as far as what we'll cover, let's take a look at that. Here's everything that we're going to be covering today, just as promised with the webinar description. First, we'll start off with an estimation of the tax return. We'll see how that process works, or of the tax refund, I should say. How to create a quick estimate of the refund. After that, we'll move right on to completing a tax return, which includes doing depreciation, doing some due diligence, and verifying the return for errors. We'll see how all that works. And then finally, we'll wrap up the webinar with showcasing a few extras, such as remote signature and the TaxPass app, using that in conjunction with the software. Well, we have lots to cover. I want to maximize your time today, so let's get right into the software and start working. I'm going to open up the brand new CrossLink 2024 software for tax year 23. Here we are in the work in progress summary. This is the first screen that you see when you launch the software, when you log in to the program. And normally I would start off the tax return or start off a brand new return by clicking on this Add New button on the very top left. This will start the process up, asking for the social so you can start a brand new return. But instead of doing that, what I'd like to do first is use this refund calculator tool at the very top of the toolbar. This here is to create an estimate of the taxpayer's refund by just entering in some minimal information. And one of the cool things about this is that once you enter this basic or minimal information to get a refund, we can then turn this estimate into a real tax return and basically finish what's left, finish entering the necessary data. So as an example, I've started off a brand new estimate here, and it's asking me what the tax situation with this family. And for this test example, what I'll do is I'll choose that they're a single person, but that they do have dependents. But of course, you click on whatever applies to that taxpayer. And if I click on next, it's going to take me through a process to complete information. And depending on what I answer, that'll calculate the refund amount, or at least give you an estimate. So I'll say, they have some dependents. I'll select head of household for the filing status. But there are options. Notice how, the options that I have only apply for those single preparers. These are like the three different types of single, so to speak. And there's also a link to help you decide. So if you need, assistance with determining which is the best filing status, if you're brand new to tax preparation, I would say we have these links here to help with that. I'll click on next for now. It's asking for the taxpayer's date of birth. I'm going to type something in here. It's asking if this taxpayer can be claimed on another return, and if they have an ITIN, I'll skip those. And they lived for more than half the year in the U.S., so I'll leave that selected. Clicking on next, now we're talking about the children and other dependents. This is going to be important when it comes to calculating credits and things. So I'll say that they have two children under the age of 17 and with SSNs. And I'll say actually that they have, let's do one and one. One under the age of 17 and one over the age of 18 that are full-time students. Okay, and then we'll click on next. Now we're getting into the income area. This is where I can start entering income and help determine what the refund is going to be. So look at all the different types of income sources we could possibly have when it comes to the taxpayer. Let's start off with a really basic one, like the W-2. If they had an employment, I'll say they earned $60,000 for the year, and let's say they paid $10,000 in withholding. That enough will start calculating. As we can see over here to the left, we're seeing some estimated refund amounts just by entering in that information there. But we'll add a few more pieces of information. Let's say they had some gambling earnings as well with the W-2G. Let's put in, $2,000 for that. And of that, they paid, let's say $300 for withholding. And then self-employed. We wanted to cover depreciation as well. So let's say that with their self-employment income, they have a small business from home and they made $10,000 for the year, just to enter something in here. Okay. As we click on next, now we have some adjustments that can be made as well. So if any of these apply, you can enter the quick and easy information, just the basics. For now, we'll just skip this. daycare paid, we have a smaller or a younger dependent. So let's go ahead and enter some information here as well. We'll say that one of the dependents had daycare expenses and we paid $10,000 for the full year. Quite a lot. And now as we click on next, we already have a summary as to what's going on with this refund. We can see how much the gross income was, deductions, adjustments, any tax credits that may apply. And it looks like with all the information that we've entered so far, the refund amount is going to be $5,744. Okay, so that gives you a quick idea as to what the refund is going to be. If you wanted to, you could, if you didn't want to move any further, you could exit directly from here, close this estimate, and return back to the software without creating like an extra record in your system. You could also take a look at your fees. There's this fee summary. So if you wanted to deal with fees, you can see that as well. In my case, my software doesn't have any of these fees configured, but in your case, I imagine you would. Going back though, another option, or one of the best options here, is I can click on Create Return. If this customer wanted to move forward with the preparation of the tax return, that refund sounds good to them. In that case, we can click on Create Return, and it's asking for the taxpayer social right away. So let me enter in something here. Oh, must have mismatched it. There we go. So now the tax return is going to open. This is normally, when you open up a brand new return, it takes you to the client data where you start entering in basic information. But in my case, if I look over here to the left, I can see that there's a whole bunch of additional forms added to this tax return. And that's because I entered information for these forms or associated with these forms when I created the estimate. So in other words, that W-2 that we entered, there's the W-2 right there. W-2G for those gambling earnings, the Schedule C for the business, 2441 for the dependent care. All those forms have been added automatically to this tax return because I was entering that information for the estimate. So all we have to do now is enter in that important information that we didn't really capture during that estimation process. So, but normally, by the way, this process, whether I'm starting off with the estimate, the benefit is these forms are attached. But normally, if you were just starting off a regular blank return, it would kick you off here with the client data, and then you would add those forms as you need them. But for now, let's go ahead and enter in some information. I'm just going to quickly go through here, enter in the first, last name, enter in their occupation, their home phone number, their cell phone. I'm going to use some features here that have to do with texting and emailing, so I want to make sure to capture in their email address. Mark this little text message box indicating that the taxpayer is okay with getting text messages and understands that there may be, text messaging fees associated with this, the standard text messaging fees. And then the cell phone carrier. You can just start typing in to this field, or you can also click choices down below if you want to see the full list of all the available carriers within the US. In this case, I'll just type in AT&T, and there we go. Working my way down, right now I'm just entering in the taxpayer's information. Let me enter in their driver's license as well. I'll say it was issued in 2022 and expires, let's say 2028. And then this little box all the way to the right here, there's a box, as you can see, or maybe somewhat difficult for you to see, but I wanted to point out that certain fields in the software, especially if you're new to CrossLink, if you don't know exactly what you should be typing in that field, you can look down below to this area at the very bottom here. This will give you kind of like a brief description of what the software expects for you to type in that field, what type of information. And that works for a lot of these fields. If I click around, you can see that a description changes down below here to give you a preview or an idea as to what you want to type in. And in this case, it's simply asking me for the ID type. I can type in D for driver's license, S for state ID, etc. The software overall, it tends to use these codes, these quick kind of like entry codes, to make the process of completing the return quicker, especially once you're familiar with what's expected. Here's another one, the filing status, right? When you're normally typing in the information, it wants to know one of these codes, 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on the tax situation. Type it in and move forward. In my case, it already had it set up for me because I entered it during the estimation process. But now I'll tab to move on to the next area. It skipped all the spouse info because that doesn't apply in this case. And we're just entering in the taxpayer's address information. Down below, we also have some combat or some fields associated with combat. If they were involved in a military conflict, we can capture that information there. We also have the bank account information. This is useful if the customer wants to do a direct deposit. In that case, you can type in this information here, and it will flow to all the forms and fields where it applies. In my case, I'll just type in one of my local banks here in Seattle and the account number. You have to double confirm that just to make sure that it's correct. And what type of account it is, checking for this example. Referral, this is typically an optional field, but if you want to capture how the taxpayer heard of your business, there are reports you can run later on to see, what's bringing folks into your office, what referral methods are working. It's really nice if you want to track that info. And in my case, let's say, I'll use social media, and I'll say that they heard me from Instagram, from some sort of ad I had there. This here has to do with the medical health insurance, whether or not they're using the Affordable Health Care Act or to have or purchase health insurance. In most cases, if they're employed, they may have health insurance through their employer. In my case, I'll say that. But if you have one of these customers that did purchase their health insurance this way through that marketplace, the government marketplace, all you would have to do is select this with an X here, indicating that, they purchased their health insurance through the marketplace. And then click on this questionnaire and use that 1095A to complete that information. But down below, this is the dependents area. This is where we can type in those dependents. So let's just start off by typing in the first one, a son, and let's type in some social here. There are some fields down to the right where you can classify or enter in some information about this, some detailed information about this dependent, starting off with the relationship. Pretty straightforward. I'll say that they're a son. How long the dependent lived with the taxpayer. In this example, I'll say the 12 months, the full year. And then the rest of it has been completed for me, as we can see. We have these codes that have popped in automatically. Number one, if I look at the bottom, it tells me view choice list for dependent codes. Well, this choice list is this choices buttons here. And if I click on that, I can see that number one, dependent live with the taxpayer. That's all it's doing. It's entering in like certain classifications for this dependent. And it's using the dependent's age, their social, to automatically select certain codes for me. But if I do need to make an adjustment, you can make that. You can just go in and change it. If we look at these other codes here, this dependent EIC E for eligible. They're eligible for EIC depending on or using the information I've entered so far. And the same thing applies for the child tax credit. Okay? It's already been added for me. Now this other dependent, let's add another one here. Daughter, last, born on the same day, but let's say that they were born in, 2002. Well, maybe that's a bit too old. Let's say, how about 4? Yeah, that's better. We'll say that their daughter lived as well, full year. And notice some codes popped in, but not all of them, because now the dependent is a little bit older. It's not automatically classifying this one for EIC. But I can say that they're a student. I'll type in an S for that field, and that took care of that. So we've completed, well, actually, let me scroll all the way to the bottom. I want to show you some other options down here that may apply to you and that are related to some extra features. First, we have this enroll in Audit Allies Audit Insurance. This has to do if you added this to your software, to your account using our CrossLink Tax website. You can add this extra service called Audit Allies. This is essentially an audit insurance or audit protection for the taxpayer. In my case, I'll add it to this return so you can see what the process looks like. We just have to type in Y for yes, indicating that the taxpayer is interested in the service. And down below, we have, does the taxpayer consent to receive and sign their documentation remotely? This has to do with remote sign, if the taxpayer wants to sign remotely. I'll type in a yes for that as well. I'm going to use that remote signature service, so I want to say yes for that. And then notice at the very bottom, include remote signature charges on the invoice. It automatically put a Y for yes there. It's taking that fee, that $5 fee typically associated with remote sign, and automatically transferring that fee to the invoice. So I can recoup that money from them. But this is optional. This is like up to you. If you do not want to charge the taxpayer that extra $5 for the remote fee, you can change that to an N for no. And that invoice fee would not appear in the return. It would still be processed. It would still be paid through the wallet, but it would not be charged to the customer. You wouldn't be recovering that money. But in my case, I'll leave it with a yes, because I'll add that to the invoice and recover that money that way. So now, what do we have here? We have a tax return. We've completed the majority of the client data. Again, the benefit of completing this primary form is that all the information that I'm entering here is going to transfer over to the forms that are part of this tax return. And what I'm going to do now is start just completing this information, going in and filling out the info that wasn't completed as part of the estimation process. For example, my W-2 here, let's open that up. I can see that the wages pulled through, my $60,000 and $10K of withholding. What's missing is my employer identification stuff. This detailed information about the employer wasn't entered. In my case, just to make this webinar a little bit quicker, I'm going to choose from my choices. These are all the employer IDs that have been entered previously. Every time you enter in a new one, it'll save it to the system so that I can select it very quickly. Let's say that they work right here in Keystone Paying Agent. I'll click OK, and as you can see, that'll populate all the information. Okay. And then if anything else applied, if they had perhaps some retirement benefits that they're calculating, you would enter that information here as well. Any state ID or state wages at the very bottom, you can enter that too. But with that, I'll just say that this is a very basic, in my case, there's no state taxes, so I don't have to capture that information for my particular state. So this W-2, for a basic W-2 without any extras, this is enough. So I'll move on to the next form here, the W-2G. This has to do with that gambling earnings that we reported before. And just like last time, we have to enter in who the payer was. In my case, I can start typing in as well. You don't have to click on choices. If you have a returning customer, you know that this EIN is already, this payer is already in your W-2 database. You can just start typing it in, move over, and there we go. It's completed all of the information. If not, if you're starting brand new, you most typically have to, enter this from the beginning, from scratch. But remember, every time you save, the program will save it to the database. And that database, by the way, can be accessed all the way to the top left. Here are all of the databases. Usually when you're clicking on that choices button, they're all tied to one of the databases that are found here on the top left. And you could always go in here, as an example, to employers and payers, take a look at your EIN database, modify them if you have to make any changes. You can do that. But normally, you can just let them build in the background. So let's enter in some information here. Let's say that they won this, in this date. And let's see what else is available here. And, I'll leave it like that for now. And we'll see if we, during the verification process, we missed anything. Because that's something to keep in mind as you're working with the return. You may encounter situations where you're not sure if you completed the form, but you can rely on verify to point out anything that may be missing, incorrect, etc. So let's move on. We did our W-2, we did our W-2G. Now we have our Schedule C having to do with that home business. I will say for this taxpayer that they have at-home landscaping business that they do when they can. And for the business code, I'll start typing in. I know that one of the business classifications is landscaping services, so I can start typing that in, and it'll pop in the business code for me to classify or give this business a classification with the IRS. But this is another one where you can click on choices and see all that. You can organize them by the number, there we go, or by description as well, if you need help finding it. Business name, we'll say that this is, this is not an official business with an actual name. It's just something that the taxpayer does on the side, so we can leave that blank. Same thing with the address. When it comes to the address information, if they have a unique business address, you can type it in here. But if not, if it's a home business, notice that we have this little box here. Check box to transfer CDS address. CDS, that means client data screen. We're talking about that client data information, the customer's home address. You may find these boxes in other forms as well. For example, I know it appears on the bank app form when you're doing bank products if you want to transfer the customer address. There's different areas where you may be transferring information from that client data screen, and it wants you to select it or to confirm that you're pulling the information from the client data. And if that's the case, it's typically referred to as this, CDS, client data screen. So if you see that, that's what that means, just to clear that up. We'll enter in some basics about this small business. We'll say that that they paid cash, or that they're using cash as the accounting method. We'll say that they're a qualified business by typing in Q. In most cases, the majority of the businesses will be qualified. There's only a few businesses that are special. If I look at specialized services or trades, you can review the IRS regulations for that. But in most cases, it's Q. And then gross receipts or sales. How much they made, let's put in 10,000 for that. Okay, and it's populated throughout. So we'll leave it at that for now. Let's go back and see what else we're missing. Let's take a look at that 2441. We're just working our way down all these forms that have been added to this return automatically. And notice that, as we enter information, the software is automatically adding more forms, filling out info, adjusting our refund amount. All that is popping up here. When it comes to the child and dependent care expenses, well, we have to report who the care provider was. Again, this is another one. If it's a returning customer, the program will save it. So I'll just say that they're from Southfield Parks. There it is right there. Is it this little question here, HH, if I look down below, enter yes or no if provider is household employee. So in other words, was this child care provider or service household employee that works for the residents, or are they some sort of like outside business, some official daycare place? I'll say that, yeah, it's not my household employee, it's just a daycare area. So I'll type in no for that. And then in the case of the credit for child and dependent care expenses, that could potentially apply as well. So let's go ahead and enter in some basics about that. We'll say that first, it wants to know, okay, who of the dependents is the one being used for this credit. And if I click on choices, I can see both of the dependents that I added with their name and social. I'll say that this is for the young son, type that in, and it populated the information for me. Over 12 and disabled, I will not select that. And qualified expenses you incurred or paid for this, let's say, the max that you can get for the credit is 3,000, but I can type in 5,000, let's say, and notice that the software will calculate the max for me. It's one of the benefits of using tax software. You don't have to enter the information as needed when it comes to as if you were filling this out manually. You can type in what they actually paid, and the software will determine the correct calculation. Okay. So let's see what else we have here. We did that. I want to point out some other important forms over here to the left. Starting at the very top, we saw the client data. Here's that audit allies protection. As soon as I selected yes for that and moved or refreshed the program, it would automatically add that form. And this is all you have to do. If you want to activate this service, this additional service, whether it's Audit Allies Protection Plus, you typically just have to add the form, and it would add that, not only the cost associated with the service, that would transfer to the tax return invoice automatically so the taxpayer can pay for this service, but also including this form as part of the return, or of the return, activates that service once it's, once the return is transmitted. That's all you have to do typically. As far as other forms that are important, the 8879. This is an important one as well. Here we can see that this taxpayer has a refund amount of $6,000 so far, $6,466. And when it comes to that refund amount, how the taxpayer is going to get that refund, that's usually entered on the 8879. This has to do with the electronic filing of this return. To e-file, you have to have this form included. It automatically attaches itself to the return if you when you open up a brand new return. And by the way, if you don't want to e-file, if you want to paper file this return instead, you can simply right-click on the form and remove it. Remove form, that will change it or swap it with the paper file version of this form. But in my case, I do want to e-file. I'll leave this 8879, and I can select at the very top what type of refund or how this taxpayer is going to get their refund disbursement. Whether it's a number 1, check from the IRS. This is a mailed check from the IRS. 2, being a direct deposit from the IRS. That's another, regular e-file, non-bank product, but they're direct depositing instead. Or 3 is reserved. You can ignore that for now. That's just an extra one we have. 4, balance due, and 5 is a bank product. If you are subscribed or enrolled with one of our partner banks, such as TPG, Republic, Refundo, or Refund Advantage, you can select option 5, and the bank application would be added to the return automatically, allowing you to process this return through a bank product refund. Okay. Now, in my case, and by the way, in all of our cases, if you're using the software, you may notice that the bank approval has not been received yet. Even if you are approved for bank products, you're not going to be able to add those bank products yet because it's just too early in the season. Typically, that bank approval is received in the software later on, around the end of this month or the beginning of the new year, usually like January 1st. So for this example, I'll just select a regular check from the IRS so that we can move forward with the return. Otherwise, you'll get an error saying no bank approval or your EFIN has not been approved for bank products. So with the information I've entered so far, let's take a look. What I'd like to do now is verify the return for errors, see if there's anything that we're missing. I suspect we are missing some stuff, but let's see. That's the benefit of this verify button at the top here of the toolbar. If I click on this, the program is going to go through all the forms and it's going to show me everything that's missing on this tax return. And actually, it doesn't look like much. We have a lot on the 8867. We'll take a look at that. But let's see here. First off, with the client information, double click on that. It took me, if I scroll up, it took me to the information and status page. That's this one right here, right below the client data. And it took me all the way to the bottom to this little field called signed 8879. The purpose of this is to be like a confirmation that that you will be signing Form 8879 with the customer, or that the taxpayer has signed Form 8879. All you have to do here is mark this with an X. There we go. And that's it when it comes to this verify. And as a matter of fact, something that you may want to do, at least for certain fields to help you process tax returns faster, is you may want to use a function that is kind of unknown sometimes, and that is the default value. In my case, I know that I'm always going to capture that signature. It's part of my process, whether I'm using electronic signatures or just sign. That is something that I'm not going to miss. So to help me verify this return faster, what I'm going to do is I mark the X, right? And then I'm going to set the default value. What's going to happen here is that the program is going to have that X marked off for all new returns moving forward. I'm setting a default value for that field so that now moving forward, every time the software is going to have that in place for me for all returns. I could always manually modify it if I needed to, but it's a useful tool that you can use to fill out the return, fill out certain fields that you want completed with certain pieces of information. Now that said, you do have to be careful. We don't want to impede on IRS regulations, especially. Let's take a look at some of these errors, and we'll have an example of one of these fields. Let's take a look at this 1040. Here's maybe another one. This has to do, we're on the 1040. It has to do with cryptocurrency. The IRS would like to report whether or not they had any exchanges if they bought or sold crypto. If that's the case, you can choose yes or no. I'll select no for this example. Verify again. Business income. This has to do, this is a new thing actually for this upcoming season, I believe. This has to do with the way businesses are reported with FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Department. They or the IRS government would like companies to register with FinCEN. So there's this little warning. If it's a new business, they have until, I believe, the beginning of not next year, but the if it's a brand new business established the 31st of December of this year onward, the business has 30 days to report with the FinCEN, do that form or report with them. If it's an already established business, open prior to the 31st of December of this year, then they have until January 2025, I believe, to do that. They have a year, this upcoming year, to do that with FinCEN. But this is just a box to acknowledge that, yeah, we discussed this. Yeah, I confirm that the address or the business is older and they have time. So moving on with the verify. Now we have 8879. Oh, this error, this has to do with I'm processing the return in 2023. This is a tax year 23 return, so I have to wait until the new year to be able to e-file this. Everyone that's preparing returns with the new system, you would encounter the same error until the new year. That's when we can start e-filing. So I'll skip that one for now, but I'll move on to the 8867. So here, this has to do with the preparer's due diligence, especially since we have dependents, all that we have to figure out or confirm that the information is accurate. And this is one, where I can help with the verify process. When I click on verify and I click on that error, it takes me to the yes or no answer, depending on, to get the credit, essentially. It's with the software is reminding me which of these answers is the appropriate one for the credit. However, of course, you do want to confirm this with the taxpayer. That's why this form exists, to confirm each one of these and make sure that the information is accurate. This is one, I was going back to that setting the default values. Probably don't want to do that for this, just to make sure that you're keeping in accordance with IRS regulations. But for the purposes of this demonstration, just to be able to show you how quickly we can process these due diligence questions, I'm just letting the verify help me go through these questions. And then all I have to do is press an X to mark that field with a yes or no. Once you click on verify, the program goes into this verification mode, where if I press enter or tab to go to a different field, the verify pops up again, because it wants to take me to the next verification error. So I can just press enter again, X, enter to open up the verification, enter to go to that error, X. So as you can see, I can do this very quickly, especially for this example. But again, you do want to review these just to avoid any issues, any miscaptured information. Review these very carefully with the taxpayer. And in this case, this is an interesting one because I have multiple options here. It took me to letter B, the verify, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's letter B. It can be the medical records, So I'll select that, or it can be multiple ones, like the child care provider as well. You choose whichever is appropriate. And if I move on to the next one, this is another one having to do with the schedule. What is this one? Confirming that the business will say that that they have, let's say, a business license and taxpayer summary income. There we go. And then finally, the last one, documentation to confirm that the head of household. We'll say that we have, let's say, a divorce decree and property tax bills. And now, if we click on verify, what else do we have? Oh, we skipped one. I accidentally missed one. It took me back to the option 2 when it comes to the due diligence. And now I think we're at a better spot. The only error that we have left is that 8879 signature date is just too early to process this return. So this is something that I won't be able to clear out until the new year. But I wanted to point out, before we get into the final steps of the tax return, we saw this due diligence here, right? But the program does have extra options that you can add. If I go into setup on the top, setup, office setup, the very first option, and I go into this auth audits tab towards the very end, here I have some options that I can activate having to do with like different areas or sections of the return. As an example, let's take a look at this head of household one. Normally, when you install the program by default, all these options are going to be off, just like I have them here in my system. And this is all about adding extra verification options to the return, basically, making the verify process more strict, more stringent, to make sure that your tax preparers are capturing all the information that's necessary. So as an example, we did the verify. The only error that we have left is that one having to do with the signature date. But if I start adding some stuff here, like, let's say, no, we do have dependent care, so I'll leave that one off. Let's do this one, and I'm just adding different types of scenarios that could pop up when you're dealing with a return. For example, this one here, filing status is head of household, but the earned income is less than, and I have 70K. Let's go ahead and change that in the case of my example. I want to change it to something that is a little bit absurd. I don't think you would use this verification process with income this high, but just to show you what this process is like, since I have a return that has less than 70,000 or less than 87,000 in this example, it'll pop up a verification error. And let's do this last one too. Filing status is head of household, ask the taxpayer what their marital status is, etc. So now, if I click OK here, and click OK, and I click on verify, notice that now we have some extra verify errors that popped up. See, that's what this is all about. It's making the verify process more strict when it comes to making sure that you're capturing the correct information. And if I double click on this, it's asking me to document the information, document the names, relationship, income amount, and other sources. So in this case, you just select them some not applicable, just to be able to move forward with the verify. Here, what type? This has to do with the income. It's asking me supplemental stuff because my income was less than the amount that I determined. Again, this is kind of a crazy example because we have so much income for this particular one, but let's just select something to report that information. What is the marital status? We'll say that in this case, we'll divorce. Oops. Oh, and it still needs some information. I think there we go. And then for this one, I'll say not applicable again, just to pass the verification. And there we go. So that's what that extra verification process looks like. Again, that's found under Setup, Office Setup, Auth Audits tab. And as you can see, we have a whole bunch of different options here that you can activate or deactivate depending on what you want your tax preparers to be reminded about, or if you want to make sure to cover something to make sure that they're entering accurate information. This could be a very useful tool. But keep in mind, it can also be a double-edged sword. You don't necessarily need to activate all of these options. You can if you really want to make sure that your tax preparers are doing their due diligence, but it'll just make, keep in mind, the more of these you activate, the longer the verify process is going to be because they have to enter in more of these options. And the program has its verification process to look for those errors that we know are going to cause a rejection. Okay? So this tax return, we've essentially completed it. There's no more errors because, the only one that we have here we can't really fix. But I do want to show you some of those extra features we were talking about, remote sign, TaxPass, and to do that, what I'll do is move over to the prior year software. Overall, it's going to work the same way. It's just that here I have full access to those tools. So I have this tax return here that I've completed, a different return, but it's done. And now if I click on verify, that's what you want to see. We have no more errors. So we can move on to some other steps, perhaps remote sign. If you want to capture this taxpayer signature remotely, that's tied to the printing process. So I can click on print here, and it'll show me this is to print the final copy of the return that I've set up in my system. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this remote sign button. If I wanted to capture the taxpayer signature immediately using my mouse, touchscreen, signature pad, you can use SignDoc for that. There's no extra fee associated with that. But if I did want to capture the taxpayer signature remotely or the spouse's signature remotely, that's when I would choose remote sign. So let's move forward with that. I clicked on remote sign, and now the software is asking me if I want to capture any signatures right now before we get into the remote signature process. In some cases, this may cause a little bit of confusion. Some people think that you have to select this box because you want to use remote sign for the taxpayer. It's actually the opposite. You want to leave it blank so that you move forward. This is if you want to do any in-office signatures right now. And if I click OK here, it'll move forward to the next step. And let's say when it comes to the remote signature link, how you want to send it to the taxpayer, I'll choose email for this example and click OK. The software is processing, communicating. It's kind of hard to tell, but at the very bottom of the program, you'll see like some numbers and some communications happening in the background. Typically you can just let it do its thing, but you will also get a confirmation just like this within a few moments. Hopefully I sent it to my work email. So let me see here. I'll see if this pops in. Normally, yep. As a matter of fact, it just popped in, and I'll show you this on screen right here. So you can see what this looks like. This is what the taxpayer is going to receive, right? So it came in just today with the name of my office, Death and Taxes, sorry about that. And then we'll review and sign. We'll click on, this is what the taxpayer has to do in order to complete this. So we'll click on that. Oh, it opened up over here. Let me show you what this looks like. So this is the link where they can review the document, they can sign, but the first thing that they have to do is enter in some information to confirm that they're really the taxpayer. And what we're looking for here is the taxpayer's last name. In my case, or in the case of this taxpayer, it is last. I believe the birth date is 1980. The last four of the social, let me confirm that. I don't remember. All sixes, okay. All sixes, and the zip code, that's another one I need to confirm. What do I put in here? 98109. Okay, 98109. Keep in mind, this information has to match what's in the return, okay? That's one of the verify processes that happen to make sure that this is actually the taxpayer. So it does have to match exactly. If they enter in some other zip code, it's going to fail. And if you click on next here, well, now it's giving me, as the taxpayer, a preview of the return. I can take a look at all the tax return with my signatures in place. You'll notice that when I requested for this signature, it didn't ask for me to sign because I already have my signature stored in the program in that database area that I was talking about. Here's the full return. If I wanted to, I can print this out as the taxpayer. I can save a copy or download using this right here. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, there's also a Save to Device button here to kind of remind the taxpayer that they can save a copy of this return to their PC or to their phone if they're using their phone. And so far, it's just confirming it's confirming me as the taxpayer to make sure that this information is accurate to the best of my knowledge. I'll say yes. Okay, on the next page, please provide your signature. All right, moving forward. And then we have this box where the taxpayer can sign. If they're using their mouse, or excuse me, if they're using their phone, they can sign directly on their screen. If you have touchscreen, you can sign as well. In my case, I just have my mouse, so I'll just sign right there, bam, and submit. Are you satisfied with my signature? I can retry if I need to, cancel, or yes, sign electronically. And there we go. That's everything that the taxpayer had to do on their end to sign. And if I close this, go back to the return here, now the taxpayer is signed, and one of the benefits is that you have received that copy. It may not seem like it, nothing really changed, but if I go into the document archive, let's take a look here. We have a full signed tax return. Normally, this loads up fairly quickly. Here it is. Oh, I believe, yeah, here it is right here. Full signed tax return. You can tell by the date stamp. December 7th, that's today, just a few moments ago. And if I double click on this, we'll see that there's that signature that I did as the taxpayer. Everything is here. If I wanted to print this out, I could, but I have this electronic copy stored in the return now. Very quick and easy to capture that signature using that remote sign. And keep in mind that you could also email from here as well. If you want to send a copy to the taxpayer, if the taxpayer contacts you later on and says, hey, can you send me a quick copy? Well, just go into your document archive, click on this email option. Well, select the one that you want to send. Click on email. It'll automatically encrypt it with this password. Click on OK. It's, by the way, that password, it's using the first 4 of the last name, which in my case just happens to be last, and the last 4 of the social for the default. And I can also select down here how the taxpayer is going to be reminded of that password. That's a definitely a good thing for you to send so that they're not asking you or confused what the password is to open this document. Let's go ahead and send that. There we go. And now, yep, looks like I got a new email. There it is. I'll show you what that looks like. Oh, this is the reminder. That's the reminder. Oh, let me show you what that looks like. This document is password protected. Password is that, right? The one that we established. And the other one is incoming. I'm sure there it is. So notice that's how this process works when you're doing that reminder of the password. It's sending essentially 2 emails. One that includes the password, the first one, and then one that includes the actual document, the PDF. That keeps it in accordance with IRS regulations. And if I entering in that password, there we go. There's that full return. Pretty convenient. All right. Now, by the way, when it comes to sending documents via email, that does typically require a little bit of configuration. You have to associate you have to go in here to setup, office setup, go into the email tab, and you have to enter in not only a Gmail address that you can use to send these emails out, you also have to enter in a specialized password, a password that you obtain using your Gmail account. If you need help with that, let us know. Support will guide you through this process. You may need a little bit of help to figure this out. There's some steps. But it's not too long. You could probably do it in like a minute or 2. You just have to generate that specialized password. But I think we're at a pretty good spot here when it comes to this return. One of the final steps, especially now that I've captured the signature and all that, you may want to queue this return. This is getting the return ready to be e-filed. Right now, we just had the federal package. If I had any state packages included in this return, they would be included here as well. But queuing the return, that's the last or one of the final steps. Now the return is waiting to be e-filed. It's in my software. If I wanted to, I can move on to a new return with the Add New button, but the program has that return there waiting. And if you do want to send out that return, if you want to e-file it, the process with the desktop software is to transmit with the program. Clicking on Transmit to Central Site here on the Work in Progress or Transmit button on the toolbar, same thing. It just opens up the transmission queue showing me what is going to be e-filed. If I wanted to, I can unselect it for now. This is if I want to not transmit this return just yet, but I want to keep it in the queue. I want to leave it in here. And some reason you may want to do that, by the way, is if you're transmitting just to pick up any updates, pick up any status changes of your returns. Keep in mind that with the desktop software, whenever you transmit with the software, it's going to see if there's any updates for the program, any changes that apply to the statuses of any of the returns. And if looks like I didn't get anything, but if I transmit again, that return is still waiting. It's always going to be waiting there until I actually send it off, or until I remove it. If I click on remove, that'll get rid of this return from the queue, and then I would have to re-queue it if I want to transmit it again. Okay? See if that makes sense. But if you just want to e-file the return, leave it as is, click on transmit. I see that I have one return ready to e-file, and once I click on transmit, off it'll go. It'll go to our central site, which CrossLink's central site, which then distributes it to the IRS in states. That's how it's transferred over to where it needs to go. But I'd like to wrap things up. We're really getting close to the hour here, but I wanted to wrap up this TaxPass app, another feature that you could potentially use with CrossLink Tax. Let me open up here. It's a specialized website, taxpassapp.com. This is if you want your customers to send you data that'll be received in the program. It's almost a way to for the taxpayer to start the return remotely. They're doing the work on their end, and then they're submitting information to you that you would receive in the software. And as an example, here I have my TaxPass app website. Your TaxPass app website can be branded with your logo, by the way. It just so happens that this is my logo. And I'm logging in as a taxpayer. Keep in mind, this is really for the taxpayer to log in. They're registering to use this app with their email, with their password. They log in, and what they're doing here is they're essentially starting the return, or an easy version of the return. Let's click on begin to see that. In my case, I just so happen to have prior year information, so it's pulling information from the prior year, but the taxpayer is confirming information, entering in their name, address, all that info, continue, filing status. I can choose single, continue. The more information the taxpayer fills out, the more information that you'll receive. And if I click on this, let me see if I can just go ahead and submit what I have. Yeah, save and submit return. Oh, before I submit, I do want to point out that they can add documents as well. Any pictures, IDs, PDFs. For the season, we allow PDFs now to be attached to the return, or to be attached to this TaxPass, return, so to speak. And then once they submit this information, you can go into your software, and that will pop up here, TaxPass app retrieval. If I click on this, I can see all of the information that was submitted to me from using this application. And I could also double click on this to upload this customer. I'll say that, yeah, I'm uploading them. And now I have this tax return completed with the information that the customer filled out. Okay? So a useful tool if you want to have some sort of bridge with a taxpayer where they can fill out information, you receive it in the return, and what you're doing in your end with the software is finalizing that tax return, completing everything that needs to be missing in order to complete it, queue it, and transmit it. But that in itself, and by the way, this TaxPass app, this is available to all of our customers at no additional cost. So if you did want to give this a try, feel free to let us know. We'll guide you through the process of activating this. If you've already used TaxPass in the app, that typically means that it's already activated. That just rolls forward every year. If you're brand new to it, it does require a little bit of configuration on our website, crosslinktax.com, where you typically just have to turn it on, essentially. Well, with that said, we've been an hour together. I think we'll leave it at that for now.